On Saturday morning, March 7th, 2026, SpaceX showed up to its launch window at Vandenberg Space Force Base and left without launching anything. This is the story of one rocket scrub and what sits behind it, the most densely populated satellite network ever put into orbit, a booster that had already flown 6 times before this attempt, and an operation so deep into its rhythm that a 24-hour delay barely shows up in the weekly count. Before this mission even attempted to fly, SpaceX had already launched its 600th Starlink satellite of 2026, and the year was 9 weeks old. The window opened at 2:58 in the morning Pacific time on Saturday, March 7th, and it stayed open until 6:58 a.m. The U.S. Space Force had cleared the range, SpaceX had a countdown running, and then nothing. Confirmation of the scrub came at 9:37 a.m. Eastern Time, and SpaceX offered no public explanation for the call. That's not unusual. Scrubs happen, and teams aren't obligated to explain in real time what triggered the no-go decision. A sensor reading, a ground system, the weather, an anomaly in a data stream, any of those can end a countdown quietly. What held was the decision to stop, and that's the point. By 5:50 that same evening Eastern Time, SpaceX had already locked in a new target, Sunday, March 8th, 2026, with ignition set for precisely 3:59 and 40 seconds in the morning Pacific Time, 6:59 and 40 seconds Eastern, or 10:59 UTC. The mission carrying all of this is called Starlink 1718, which gives you the naming convention, the 18th launch into Shell 17 of the constellation, carrying 25 additional broadband satellites into low Earth orbit, where more than 9,900 SpaceX spacecraft already operate. Liftoff will send the rocket on a southerly path, which is standard out of Vandenberg, heading south over the Pacific rather than east, reaching the polar and near-polar orbital planes that deliver global coverage. Residents of Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, and Ventura counties may hear sonic booms when the booster descends, and what people actually experience depends on atmospheric conditions, but the sound is real, and on the California coast it has become one of the more recognizable signatures of modern rocketry. The Falcon 9 first stage assigned to this mission carries the designation B1097, and its history is worth understanding because it tells you something about how SpaceX actually operates at this point. Sunday's flight will be B1097 7th, following 6 previous missions that include the Twilight commercial satellite, Sentinel-6B, a joint European-American ocean and climate monitoring spacecraft, and 4 separate batches of Starlink satellites. The most recent of those 6 flights landed on January 25, 2026, 6 weeks before the scrub. 6 weeks later, the same booster was back on the pad, cleared for another go. About 8 minutes after liftoff, B1097 separates from the upper stage and begins its return to the Pacific Ocean, targeting the drone ship named Of Course I Still Love You. A successful landing there would be the 182nd for that vessel specifically, and the 582nd booster landing in SpaceX history overall, which is a number that still takes a moment to absorb, because less than a decade ago, landing an orbital-class booster at all was considered theoretical by most of the aerospace industry. The name of that drone ship comes from The Player of Games, a science fiction novel by Ian M. Banks, whose work Elon Musk has cited as a direct influence, and several of SpaceX's ships carry names drawn from the fictional artificial intelligences in that series. Across 553 flights, the Falcon 9 Block 5 variant, the version on this mission, carries a success rate of 99.82%, and the full Falcon 9 family, going back to its debut, holds 99.52% across 621 launches over 16 years. SpaceX is currently working to certify each booster core for up to 40 total flights, which means B1097 on its 7th still has a long runway ahead. 25 satellites sounds like a large number until you set it against the constellation that already exists, and then it starts to look like what it is: routine maintenance on a network that has grown well past the point most people were tracking. As of early March 2026, SpaceX had launched approximately 11,400 Starlink satellites in total. Of those, about 9,900 remain in orbit, and approximately 8,300 are considered operational. The rest are in the process of deorbiting on a rolling schedule that SpaceX manages continuously. Third-party trackers produce those figures, and they shift daily, so treat them as a snapshot rather than a fixed count. Here's where that number lands in context. Starlink alone now accounts for more than half of all operational satellites circling Earth. Every satellite ever launched by every country and organization in history, stretching back to Sputnik in 1957, adds up to roughly 14,000 total objects ever sent to orbit. SpaceX owns the majority of what's currently working up there. The pace behind that scale is just as striking. In 2025, SpaceX flew 120 Starlink missions on Falcon 9, deploying more than 3,000 V2 mini satellites and adding roughly 270 terabits per second of network capacity across a single calendar year. And by March 3rd of 2026, 4 days before Saturday's scrub, SpaceX had already sent up its 600th Starlink satellite of the new year, 9 weeks in. Service now reaches more than 150 countries and territories, and in the third quarter of 2025, Ookla's data showed that Starlink accounted for 97.1% of all satellite-based speed test samples globally. Not a dominant share, but near total presence in its category. The traffic consequences of that scale are real. Approximately 1,600 close approaches per week, meaning 2 objects passing within 1 kilometer of each other in orbit, keep SpaceX's automated collision avoidance systems running constantly. February 2026 produced a milestone that SpaceX didn't announce loudly, but that landed less than a month before this scrub. Starlink crossed 10 million subscribers. That number climbed from 9 million at the end of 2025, and the trajectory has been consistent for years. Reuters reported that SpaceX generated approximately $8 billion in profit against $15 to $16 billion in total revenue, with Starlink contributing somewhere between 50 and 80% of that revenue figure. Reuters didn't attach a specific year to those numbers, so the right way to read them is as a recent approximation rather than a certified annual figure. But even with that caveat, the direction is clear. Starlink is not a side project anymore. It's the financial engine that funds the rocket program, and the rocket program, in turn, keeps the cost of building the satellite network lower than any competitor could match starting from scratch. That loop, cheaper launches funding more satellites generating more revenue funding better rockets, is what SpaceX has been building for years, and it's now running at scale. The first serious stress test of that loop arrives in 2026 because Amazon's low Earth orbit internet service is going live, and Amazon has already signed large commercial contracts ahead of its launch. For the first time, Starlink faces a competitor with genuine resources and a long-term commitment to the market, and how that plays out over the next few years is one of the more consequential business stories in the technology industry right now. An honest account of Starlink in 2026 doesn't skip the tensions that have accumulated alongside the constellation, and there are several worth understanding on their own terms. Astronomers have been raising a separate set of concerns for years, and those concerns have only grown as the constellation expanded. Starlink satellites are bright enough to see with the naked eye. Long-exposure telescope images used for deep sky research routinely show satellite streaks across the frame, and radio astronomers face an additional problem because Starlink's transmission signals sometimes bleed into the sensitive frequency bands used for deep space observation. SpaceX has worked with the astronomy community on design changes to reduce satellite brightness, but with thousands of objects in orbit, there is a ceiling to what engineering modifications can fix. Those 1,600 close approaches per week sit at the center of a third concern: space traffic management, and specifically whether governance frameworks have kept pace with the hardware. SpaceX operates automated avoidance systems and designs its satellites to deorbit within 5 years, but as more operators enter low Earth orbit, the coordination demands multiply. The regulatory structures for managing that crowding are still catching up, and that gap is a structural issue for the whole industry, not just SpaceX. The most immediate next step is Sunday morning, March 8th, with Starlink 1718 back on the schedule at 3:59 and 40 seconds Pacific time. Spaceflight Now will carry live coverage starting roughly 30 minutes before liftoff. Beyond Sunday, Vandenberg launches are tentatively scheduled for March 11th and March 14th, which gives you a sense of how little a single scrub disrupts the overall pace. The longer-term shift to watch involves Starship, SpaceX's fully reusable next-generation launch vehicle, which the company plans to use for deploying the V3 generation of Starlink satellites. Those satellites are expected to deliver 10 times the downlink capacity and 24 times the uplink capacity compared to the V2 mini satellites currently in orbit. And moving to Starship for those deployments would widen the performance gap between Starlink and any competitor trying to match it on capability rather than just price. The Federal Communications Commission has already authorized SpaceX to launch up to 15,000 total satellites, including an additional 7,500 second-generation spacecraft. The regulatory approvals exist. Manufacturing is running at up to 45 satellites per week, and at peak periods, SpaceX has put as many as 240 into orbit in a single month. The production side is not the constraint. What SpaceX has built over the last several years is infrastructure in the older sense of the word, the kind that, once in place at scale, becomes very difficult to replicate from zero. Amazon arrives in 2026 with resources and commitment, and that will be a genuine contest. But the head start that Starlink holds, measured in thousands of satellites and 10 million paying subscribers across 150-plus countries, is not the kind of lead that closes quickly. A rocket that was supposed to lift off on a Saturday morning did not. That's where this started, and on the surface, it's a minor story. A 24-hour delay, 25 satellites that will reach orbit on Sunday instead of Saturday, a booster that will land in the Pacific one day later than planned. Pull back from that, and what you're actually watching is an industrial operation that now places more than half of all active satellites in orbit, that flew at 120 missions in a single year and added 270 terabits per second of capacity while doing it, that crossed 10 million subscribers in February and serves customers in more than 150 countries, and that is preparing to hand off its primary payload deployment to a larger, fully reusable rocket. The Scrub is a data point. The program behind it is something else entirely. Sunday morning, a little before 4 a.m. on the California coast, B-1097 will either clear the pad on its 7th flight and send 25 satellites toward a network that already numbers in the thousands, or the teams will stand down and schedule another attempt. Either way, the next launch after that one is already on the calendar. That's where this program lives now.